place within, oh, filled up with peace, and a quiet voice of bliss that does never cease. It's a healer of our minds and cures all our disease. It gives us courage strong, gives us songs of peace, a brightness beyond all darkness, a hope beyond despair, a faith to fly as high as eagles, and a grace to keep us here. There is a heart within, all filled up with love, and beauty shines all around and above. It guides each step we take with joy and wisdom's light. It gives us strength to face each day and every night. Brightness beyond all darkness, a hope beyond despair, a faith to fly as high as eagles, and a grace to keep us here. A brightness beyond all darkness, a hope beyond despair, and a faith to fly as high as eagles, and a grace to keep us here.
Om Asatoma Sangamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityama Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Madhi Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Tenamam Pahinityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through, O Lord, and protect us evermore with your sweet and compassionate face. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning. The title of today's talk is How to Save the World. And you're probably wondering, why have we been keeping this secret so long, right? I probably should have called it How to Save the World According to Vedanta. That might have been a little less presumptuous. But actually, that's not quite right either. I think really what it should be called is How to Save Our World. But it's a universal this is too loud. According to Vedanta, it is the love and the joy that we feel within ourselves that we want to see manifest. That's where the urge to save the world, to fix the world, to make the world a better place comes from. All the love and the joy and the peace and the beauty that we see outside, according to Vedanta, comes from within us. It's actually inside. We project this. That's the Vedantic idea. Conversely, all the misery and horror and darkness and filth that we see in the world that we disapprove of is within our minds, as much as we don't want to admit that. This is the Vedantic idea. And the reason I decided on this subject today is that I've heard a lot about how the world is getting worse lately. Over the last few months, a lot of people have complained to me, it seems maybe more than I'm used to, have complained that the world is getting worse, needs help, needs fixing, especially now. And the basic idea is that I hear, I am good and this world is bad. That's kind of the position people take. They may be non-dualists, right, at least philosophically, but when we start complaining about the world, we're pretty much dualists. I am this thing, the consciousness inside this soggy sack of carbon that walks around and does these things, and the world is all the stuff I see around me. That's the operational attitude that we have when we're going to fix the world, save the world, improve the world, or just complain about the world. And Swami Vivekananda says this just isn't true. He says that we are all the time from our childhood trying to lay the blame upon something outside of ourselves. If we are miserable, we say, oh, the world is a devil's world. But why should we be in such a world if we are really so good? We only get what we deserve, he says. It is a lie when we say the world is bad and we are good. It can never be so. It is a terrible lie that we tell ourselves. That's what Swami Vivekananda says. And I think probably the biggest stumbling block for us in this teaching is that one sentence, we only get what we deserve. You know, when things are going okay, maybe we can accept that teaching. But when things go south, it's very difficult. I don't know anyone who at one time or another has not thought, I don't deserve this. And it may not just be about me. It could be these people over here that I'm seeing on TV don't deserve what they're getting, right? Or this person that I know is in the situation that he doesn't or she doesn't deserve, right? How I know these things or have these opinions, well, it's kind of reactionary. I just see this thing and I come to a strong opinion about how this just isn't right, right? And yet, you will find this basic teaching. We only get what we deserve in every religion somewhere or other. There is no injustice in God's domain. Every religion will tell you that, right? Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, said that the denial of legitimate suffering is the foundation of all mental illness. The denial of legitimate suffering is the foundation of all mental illness. And religion basically says all suffering is legitimate. And so maybe that explains Sri Ramakrishna's teaching about the world being insane. He says the world is a lunatic asylum. Because we cannot accept this, right? We have a hard time agreeing to this. And so we try through whatever, like I say, we see something, we don't approve of it, and we're going to go do something about it. We all have this reaction at some time or another, even the so-called bad people in the world, right? I think Putin, in his way, is trying to make the world a better place. He sees the problem a lot differently than the rest of us do, right? He misses the Russia of his youth, and he wants to go out and he's got to murder thousands of Ukrainians to restore Mother Russia's glory because this is what the world needs, according to him, right? Obviously, most of us would not agree with that. But we have we have our own issues, right? Some people think the world would be a better place if all abortions were illegal, right? Other people clearly don't think that, right? We may wonder, is there a policy, any policy that you could think of, that is actually good for everyone all the time? Is there such a thing? Are there two sides to every issue? Well, Vedanta, of course, says there are two sides to every issue. And I'm going to get to that. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit more about saving the world versus saving our world. Why are the two different? What is this world, right? Like I said, the people that complain about the world, basically the operational definition is, it's what I see around me. I'm this world is what I see around me. Perfectly objective, right? Not so simple. I learned this very graphically and immediately when I was an undergraduate in college. I was living in the monastery in San Diego. This is more than 30 years ago now. And I was a monk, a weekend warrior. I was a weekend evening monk. I lived in the monastery there, and I was a student by day, right? And I was a tech major, so I had a bunch of nerdy friends, okay? And we studied together during the day, and then I went back and I meditated and swept and had some minor little monastic duties that I did. And they thought I was kind of weird for being a monk, living in a monastery, but their lives weren't that much different. I mean, they didn't pray and meditate, but they didn't do anything. I mean, they didn't go to frat parties. They were a bunch of nerds, right? Their idea of a good time was taking a computer apart and putting it back together. That's what they did. Or they had, a job at an engineering firm, something like that. Very goal-oriented people, right? And so on break, Christmas and Easter, I'd go back to where I grew up, which was Venice. And this is the Venice of 30 years ago, very different than the Venice of today. And a lot of my friends were gangsters and derelicts that did nothing. Nothing. This is late 80s, early 90s, so there's rave parties. I don't know if you remember those. Rave parties were starting, okay? And so I had friends that was it. They turned pro. They were professional partiers. They did nothing else. They had no jobs. They didn't study anything. They had no goals, as far as I could tell. And I remember following a friend of mine around the Venice boardwalk, and he's getting a bunch of job applications. And after we go to a few of these little shops and get job applications, I ask him, what are you doing? Why are we doing this? You don't want to work at any of these places. Mm-hmm. Well, if he fills out a few job applications, he can get unemployment insurance and fund his rave habit, right? The irony of it is he's a Republican who's against welfare spending, thinks that people will freeload off the government. I wonder why, right? Nevertheless, he's gaming the system, and he disapproves of the system because he thinks people will game it, right? This is the world we live in, right? We have our own little worlds like this. Anyway, so I tell him and some of the other derelict friends that are doing absolutely nothing with their lives, that I go to university with some people that never do anything like this. They have no concept of what you're doing. They've never been to a rave party. They don't party at all. We study, and on the weekends they build robots or whatever they do, you know. They're not doing this. Never, not even once. And they didn't believe me. They did not believe that such people existed. No such people. You just don't know them that well. They must go to a rave now and then, every once in a while. No, they didn't. Okay, I couldn't convince them. And you can probably guess the next half of this story, which is that I go back to the university and I'm studying with the nerds and I say, I got a bunch of friends back in Venice that never do anything. They don't study anything, they don't go to work, they don't have any higher goals or aspirations in life. All they do is party, that's it, nothing else. Life is one party after another. Nope, didn't believe me. No such people. You just don't know them, right? They must aspire to something. They must study something. They must occasionally work. No, they didn't. I grew up with them. I know they didn't. And this was a very big lesson for me because I realized not only do these people live in different worlds, but their worlds are so far apart that they cannot even conceive of the existence of the other world, right? If you live a life of work and duty and goals and aspirations, you can't, if you do that enough, you can't really conceive of a life without it, at least some little bit of it, right? And the converse, right? If you have absolutely nothing, you can't imagine that there's anybody out there that doesn't occasionally go derelict in his or her duty, right? And you say, okay, well, my lesson here is what Swami Vivekananda said. As each one of us brings our own mind, so we see our own world. In other words, our world is the world in our minds, right? That was the lesson I got here. And you say, okay, yeah, the world is the world in our minds, but still, the nerds and the derelicts could agree, theoretically, that Putin invaded Ukraine, right? There's an objective reality that we do share, right? There is something in common that seems to be the objective part of this world. And I would say no, not really. I don't think so. You know, every day we look at our news and we get our news feed and we basically reinvent our world. And you say, no, I don't reinvent the world, I just read the news. Right? The news is the news. I'm not inventing the news is the news. No, I don't think so. I don't think the news is the news. I guess it was about 40 years ago that the newspaper USA Today started. We know that one, right? It started about 40 years ago, USA Today. And they had a different way they were going to report the news. Probably some of you remember this. They called it the journalism of hope. And the first day they started the newspaper, the headline was a plane crash, right, where a bunch of people died. What was the headline on USA Today? They wrote, "Miracle, 327 survive, 55 die," right? This was their effort to find the good news in the bad, to make news happy, right? To be positive. The journalism of hope, they called it. Doesn't work. Nobody wants it. Nobody will read this. They gave up very quickly because it does not sell, and no one has ever tried it since. Okay? So the news isn't the news. The news is the news we want. As Swami Vivekananda says, we get the news we deserve, right? They tried something else. No, it's a bunch of fluff or whatever we thought. I don't know. Nobody wanted it, and they gave up on it. And the psychologists might debate why we don't like this. Vedanta says it's pretty simple. Basically, the impure mind is attracted to lower things. We like salty stories. because that's the state of our minds. That's where our minds are, right? Holy Mother puts it this way. She says, it is the nature of water to flow downwards, but the sun's rays lifted up towards the sky. Likewise, it is the very nature of the mind to go to lower things. But the grace of God can make the mind go higher. And so, that's what we need to do. And what we need to do is try and purify the mind. The purified mind is no longer quite so attracted to the salty stories of the world. But in the state we are in now, we kind of like the salty stories, but we like to not like them. We like to complain about them. We like to talk about how bad everything is. But we kind of enjoy it at the same time in a sort of morbid way, right? And one woman came through the desert, and we had some conversation like this. And she said, well, we have to stay informed. It's our duty to stay informed. I don't think so, but I won't argue the point because I know a lot of people do think so. But there's a limit to how informed we need to be. Just like a week or so ago, after the election, some guy in Ohio who didn't like the results of the election shot and killed one of his neighbors because he suspected he was a Democrat. He didn't know, but he suspected he was a Democrat and shot and killed him, right? Clearly, he's taking in too much news, right? He's taking this too seriously, obviously, right? And you say, okay, yes, but there's a perfect example of how the world's getting worse. That never used to happen, right? I've never heard of that before. Clearly, obviously, this is a sign that the world is actually getting worse, right? You can point to all, and this is just one trend. So many trends you can point to and say, yes, the world is getting worse because this, and this, right? This is what you hear all the time. Here's this trend that shows that this particular thing is getting worse. I had another person, a woman, she came through the ashram. She's been an English teacher in the high desert for 30 years. She retired a few years back. And she taught 12th grade English. And my suspicion is that she's probably a great English teacher. I think I would have loved her as an English teacher in high school. Kind of an angry idealist a little bit, and just a really fun, thought-provoking English teacher, I suspect. But anyway, she said that by the end of her teaching career, she could no longer assign a novel in 12th grade English. No books. I thought, what do you do in 12th grade English if you don't read a book? I mean, what else is there to do in 12th grade English? Well, she said she cuts out little snippets of things off the internet. Why? Because the kids won't read the books. You can assign the books. Not one kid in the class is going to read it. Now, that wasn't the case when she started. When she started, school was like I remember in 12th grade, where you read books in 12th grade English, right? But gradually, this tapered off, especially with the popularity of social media rising. That was a big chunk out of it. But it was kind of a gradual trend, right? And you say, okay, how can you say, this clearly would suggest that the youth of today, kids today, right? Kids today can't focus, can't obey, can't delay gratification long enough to get through a novel, right? These are all signs of the decay of our civilization, right? I looked it up. It's not true. People have been complaining about kids today for thousands of years. I found, the earliest one I found is from 8th century BC, the ancient Greek philosopher Hesiod. What does he say? He says, I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today. For certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was young, that sound familiar? When I was young, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders. But the present youth are exceedingly disrespectful and impatient of restraints. That sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? I won't bore you with the rest of the quotes that I found on the internet. Suffice it to say that we have been complaining about the youth of today, and it's the same stuff. They don't dress right, the women are immodest, the music is terrible, all that stuff. Thousands of years it goes back, right? What does this demonstrate? Clearly, it demonstrates that the complaint is without merit, right? Think about it. If every single generation was inferior to the generation preceding it, going back for almost 3,000 years, where would we be? We would be dragging our knuckles and living in caves, right? But of course, that's not happening. We've done all kinds of things. You know, we used to go to the dentist and they'd put leeches on us to bleed us. That's long gone, right? We put somebody on the moon, computers, all this stuff we have, right? Society has advanced. We don't at least openly enslave people anymore, right? And so you say, okay, well, how do you explain the kids not reading the books, right? Or any other thing that we see, right? Any other of these trends that we see in the world, right? You can point to anything and say it's gotten worse since I was a teenager, whatever it is, right? How do I explain that away if things aren't really getting worse? Well, of course, the kids today are coming up with new categories that we're not keeping track of because we don't get it, right? They're innovative, they're smarter than us, they're better than us, they're coming up with new stuff, so is the world. We're tracking the categories of what he said, when I was young. When I was young, these were our categories, and this is what I keep track of, and now no one's paying them the proper respect. Well, the world and the kids are coming up with new categories. We don't know what they are. They'll come up with new things and go in new directions that we don't see coming, right? So the point is, it is a question of perspective. This is our world again, not the world, right? Our world depends very much on how old we are, right? Swami Vivekananda puts it this way. He says, every child is a born optimist. He dreams golden dreams. In youth, he becomes still more optimistic. It is hard for a young man to believe that there is such a thing as death, such a thing as defeat or degradation. Old age comes and life is a mass of ruins. Dreams have vanished into the air, and the man becomes a pessimist. Thus we go from one extreme to the other, buffeted by nature without knowing where we are going. And so, this is the world of our minds, right? And what Vedanta says, our duty is to purify the mind, ultimately to transcend the mind. Right? That's really what we want to do. We don't want to look at the apparent world through this mind that is subject to all kinds of fluctuations and desires and hatreds and resentments and all these things, right? It colors our judgments. And you think, well, okay, I'm going to transcend the mind, but that takes a while. At least this yoga business, it seems like lifetimes maybe of trying to transcend the mind. In the meantime, what are we going to do about global warming, right? Or whatever. Do I really need to know the meaning of the life, the universe, and everything to understand that global warming is bad? That one seems like something we should all be able to agree on, right? That seems like I said in the beginning, is there really a policy that we could all agree is good and for everybody's best interest? You point the finger, global warming seems like a pretty good candidate, right? Surely we can all get behind that one. Well, except for the coal miners in Virginia, right, West Virginia, they clearly have some interest in mining coal. And the oil men, of course, they don't want it either because that's their livelihood. Well, you say, okay, but they're just being short-sighted. It's still in their best interest in the long run to fight climate change. I mean, it's in everybody's best interest. Yes, except, of course, those areas of the planets that actually stand to benefit from climate change. There are some, right? Climate change isn't going to be bad everywhere. Some people's quality of life will actually increase due to climate change. Not here, right? This is going to dry out, apparently. Well, you say, okay, but still, it's in most people's best interest to fight climate change. except that we don't really know how many people actually do live in areas that do stand to benefit from a change in climate. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm green, and I think we should switch to green energy. I do. On the other hand, what I'm pointing out is even the most seemingly one-sided issue does have two sides. There are two sides to every issue. This is the Vedantic teaching. There is no absolute good or absolute bad here in this world. That's what Vedanta tells us. And Swami Vivekananda says it's very important for us to be able to identify both sides of every issue. Why? Why is that important? Because if we can only see one side of an issue, we are quite much more likely to become fanatical and do something crazy, like blow up an abortion clinic or throw paints on an old picture in a museum for climate change, or whatever some of these things people are doing. You know, bring an AR-15 to the PTA meeting to make sure the kids aren't getting brainwashed, right? If we can see two sides of an issue, yes, we can have an opinion on them. But we don't need to go crazy. We don't need to go nuts and kill each other over these things. We don't have to go shoot our neighbor because we think he's a Democrat, right? And so that's the Vedantic idea, that there is no ultimate good and ultimate bad. And it's interesting, an opposing viewpoint was put forward by a rabbi, Kushner, Harold Kushner. He wrote a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. You know this book. It's famous. It's been out for about 40 years, sold many millions of copies. It's in the library, okay. I think it's on the internet too. Anyway, very good. So, he wrote this book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And he wrote the book because his son had a terrible disease called progeria. And progeria apparently makes you die the death of an old man at the age of about 13 or 14. Horrifying for parents, right? At 8 months, you get this disease. Your growth is stunted. You start going bald by the time you're 5. You've got arthritis at 10, and you're dead by 13 or 14. Brutal. Now, he views his son as an innocent, right? In his worldview, this kid is a tabula rasa, and he's been visited by this, what he considers to be pure evil thing, this disease. He is also a good man, maybe not perfect, but he's a man of God who preaches the word of God through the Jewish tradition. So he's a good person, his son is an innocent person, and this terrible thing has happened to him. How can you explain this in the domain of a just and merciful, loving God who is all-powerful? And he comes to the conclusion that God can be either all good or all-powerful, but not both. Because if he was both, my son wouldn't have got this disease, right? And so it's interesting because of this disease, he wrote this book, sold millions of copies. Many people have found solace and consolation from it. And so he does an interview on NPR a few years ago, and the reporter asks him the obvious question. Well, isn't it possible that this was all part of God's plan? That your son got this disease so that you would write this book, so that millions of people would read it and get comfort from your experience. You have helped millions of people through this disease, which means maybe the disease isn't all evil. The rabbi's response, that's not the kind of a God I want to deal with. That's what he said. That's not the kind of a God I want to deal with. I sympathize. My mom is sitting back there in a wheelchair. Why? Seems like we could have done all this, whatever we're doing, without that. I don't know. Why did that happen? And I understand when the emotions run high, it's difficult to admit that there may be a silver lining to the cloud. And the rabbi, after all these years, still can't do it. Nevertheless, the Vedantic idea is there. There is no absolute good or bad. There is no one-sided issue. And so, if that's true, if there's no absolute good or bad, and there's no one-sided issue, what do we do? What is our duty here? How are we going to save the world? How are we going to save our world? Well, the Vedantic teaching, again, as I said, is to purify the mind. Why? Because that's the world we actually know, right? According to Vedanta, the mind is like a lake, right? And all these sensory inputs that we get are like stones being thrown into the lake. And those stones create waves, and those waves are our thoughts, right? So what we know really is not the world, but our response to the world. That's what we know. Now, if that water is dirty, the thoughts will seem like one thing. And if the water is clean, the thoughts will seem different. And if we can purify the mind sufficiently, according to Sri Ramakrishna, we will get a new mind. He says the pure mind is different. When the pure mind is operating, he says this ordinary mind, the one that we all have right now, in various shapes and sizes and flavors, that does not function. When the pure mind is operating, this ordinary mind stops functioning. And with that pure mind, what we do is we see God in this world, behind this appearance. Behind the appearance of birds, trees, people, cars, all this stuff, there is a bliss and a love that we actually perceive with this mind. And Swami Ashokananda describes a little bit more graphically what this is like. He talks about this other mind. He says it takes us deeper and deeper within ourselves toward God. Even when we do perceive things in the outside world, this other mind penetrates the surface of these things. It pierces the sheaths of matter and of this ordinary mind. So this pure mind apparently is within, deep within us, and it sees through the mind and the matter that the mind perceives. And it discovers behind everything that is, living or non-living, the effulgent presence of God. So in common parlance, we see through the matrix, right? Ramana Maharshi compared it to a movie. Right? Somebody asked Ramana Maharshi, how can you just sit here in this ashram and be so blissful all the time when the world is such a terrible place? Right? And he didn't say what I'm saying today, which is that, well, that's your world and I'm living in this ashram in my world. He didn't say that. What he said was that once you see through this, like Ashokananda and Sri Ramakrishna are talking about, once the pure mind is awakened and it sees through this apparent world, he says, basically you're watching a movie here. And when the movie gets scary, you see a war or a forest on fire or whatever else, you may get frightened. You may not like it, but you're not going to get up and attack the screen, right? Because you know that this is just a movie, right? And in addition to that, what all these great ones say is that when you see through this apparent world, this appearance of diversity, and you perceive this loving reality behind it, your heart is so full. Your heart is so loaded with love that it completely transforms you. And that full heart is not capable of doing any harm to anyone. You don't have to calculate about someone else's perceived interest to avoid injuring them, because your heart is so full of love you never make a false step, right? That is the reaction that we get when we see through this world. We are in love, not like, oh darling, I love you, go to work now, bye, kiss on the cheek. Not that love. Head over heels, love. I can hardly catch my breath, love. I can't think of anything else, love. Right? That first love that you had in junior high or high school, that you couldn't even walk down the street straight, right? That love. The love where the heart is so full, as Sri Krishna says in the Gita, that it can hardly hold it, right? And so, at this point, you may be thinking that I haven't named this talk correctly. This shouldn't be called How to Save the World. This should be called How to Legitimize Ignoring the World. Right? how to feel okay about not being bothered by the world, how to not be bothered about not being bothered by the world, right? But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the argument that to not be bothered by the world is to save the world, our world. To not be bothered by our world is to save our world. Why? Because not being bothered by the world, as I'm going to talk about in a second here, is not from apathy. It's not done with indifference. To really not be bothered by the world is done through love. And love conquers all. Love conquers hatred. You say, well, what if everybody did this, right? What if everybody stopped fighting climate change and just went to a cave and tried to transcend the mind? What would happen? All the oilmen would take over and burn all up all the oil and the planet would die, right? But I don't think so. Because love conquers all. Love is contagious. And it wins in the end. And I'm going to tell you a story about Buffalo Bill. I don't mean the cowboy. But I mean this Buffalo Bill, they called him Wild Bill Cody. He was actually a prisoner in a World War II concentration camp. And he was discovered by an American medic named George Ritchie, who later on became a medical doctor. But in World War II, he went to Germany and liberated the Jews. And he was, I think, just 21 at the time. And he was just a lowly medic. And he'd already been in European theater for a while, and he'd seen a bunch of horror. But he said that in spite of all, being a medic in a war, you can imagine you see a lot of human sausage, right? But he said in spite of all that, nothing prepared him for what he saw in the camps. To see the effect of starvation, torture, and disease and abuse for 5 or 6 years on a group of human beings huddled together in the cold was more than he could take. He felt like his nerves were going to be shattered. He felt like he was going to have some kind of nervous breakdown. He didn't know what to do. He was at his wit's end. And so he comes up with an idea. God bless him. He's not the hero of the story, by the way, but it's an amazing idea he comes up with. How am I going to deal with the horror that I'm seeing in front of me? That's the question he's facing, right? This young medic. How am I going to deal with this horror? And he decides what he's going to do. He's going to walk through the concentration camp and look at the faces of all the tortured prisoners and try and see God behind each face. That's his method. That's what he's going to do to try and cope with the situation. That's his coping mechanism, right? We all have our coping mechanisms. What do? We call, we're not in a concentration camp, obviously, but whatever happens in life, our situation goes south, what do? We call a friend. We get a bucket of ice cream and Netflix binge or something, or we self-medicate, or we go for a walk in the park. Whatever we do, we have a coping mechanism, right? He figured out how to make God his coping mechanism. This is something that as spiritual aspirants, we all have to figure out how to do. We all have to, our situations are all so different, and our challenges are all so different that we have to figure this out for ourselves. But we must, like he did here, figure out some way to make God our coping mechanism. Because if we do, the universe will respond. And it responded to him when he did this. The response was he got to meet a saint. He got the close contact of a saint. And in the mysterious economy of God, if we can get close contact with a saint, it can change our whole lives. So he goes through these phases and he sees this guy. And he says, well, obviously this guy hasn't been here this long because he looks pretty good. His eyes are bright. His posture is erect. His attitude is good. He doesn't look like he's starving. He must have just got here, right? And he asks him his name, and he can't pronounce it. It says it's like 7 or 8 Polish syllables that he can't say. And so everybody just called him Buffalo Bill. And I don't know his name. But he had a big handlebar mustache, and he looked like Buffalo Bill, I guess. So Buffalo Bill, turns out, he speaks like 6 or 7 languages, and the Jews are from all over Europe, right? They don't speak the same languages, and the Americans are trying to figure out where to put these people. You go to these camps, you liberate these people, and a lot of the time their life is gone, their family's gone, their whole hometown is gone. There's nothing to return them to, and it's soul-crushing work to go through the Nazi files and look at these lives that have been destroyed, and then meet the person there whose life has been destroyed and try and figure out some way to put this back together, right? The Americans can't take very much of this. It's just too depressing, as you would imagine, right? Somehow, Buffalo Bill can do this for 16, 17, 18 hours a day, and he just gets more and more enthusiastic by the end of the day. The Americans are dropping with fatigue, and this guy says, well, let's just do this one other guy. He's been waiting all day. And the medic says that the compassion, the joy on his face made him glow. He's doing this work and he's glowing while the Americans are drooping over and dropping, right? And they just want to go to bed. That is not why I think he's a saint, but it is a saintly quality, right? Why? Because clearly he is working through love, right? Love is what doesn't give you fatigue, right? If you're working for money, or you're working for duty, or you're working to pass a test or something, of course you can get exhausted. But if love is really your motive, if love is the motive power, you never get tired. There's no fatigue. You welcome more work because it's an opportunity to prove your love. We remember this deep down. We've had this experience sometime in our lives where we really worked through love and we just were eager to take on the next task, whatever it was. This is what's fueling Buffalo Bill with all these people, right? He's a real karma yogi. And his love is not just limited to the Jews. You say, well, it's not really a karma yogi because he's Jewish and they're all Jewish and it's like a Jewish thing. No, it's not true. His love goes not only to the Jews and to the Americans, but also to the German prison guards. All of them he loved. And so they're going through all these files, and the medic finally gets to Buffalo Bill's file. And he finds that he didn't just get to the camp. He's been there since 1939. He's been there as long as anybody else. He's been in this camp, getting tortured and starved like everyone else. And yet, the medic says there are no adverse medical effects with this guy, right? Love has sustained him. And I'm going to get to why I'm saying these things. We're going to hear his story in a minute, okay? But love has kept him going through this whole time. It has kept him physically healthy, mentally cheerful. This is a mind established in sattva, right? He has this. And it is so firmly established in sattva that he can withstand the deterioration of his entire world. One of the things that happened when the Americans started freeing the Jews from the camps in the very beginning, some of the Jews were so insane with anger and resentment and desire for revenge that as soon as they got liberated, they grabbed the nearest American gun and ran to the nearest German village and started shooting the nearest Germans they could find, right? Understandable, in my opinion. But, of course, the Americans tried to stop this. I mean, you can't let that happen. And so the medic is commiserating with Buffalo Bill, and he's sympathizing with these Jews that have gone bats and shot up the Germans, innocent Germans, just because they were crazed with anger. And he says to Buffalo Bill, a lot of these people have lost everything. They've lost the people they love. They've lost their houses, their jobs, their lives. Sometimes their whole city's gone, right? There's nothing. It's all gone. And at this point, Buffalo Bill tells his story. And I'll read the medic's account. They're sitting over tea, and he says, Wild Bill leaned back in his upright chair and sipped at his drink, and he starts his story. We lived in the Jewish section of Warsaw, he began slowly. The first words I had heard him speak about himself. My wife, our 2 daughters, and our 3 little boys. When the Germans reached our street, they lined everyone up against a wall and opened up with the machine guns. I begged to be allowed to die with my family. But because I spoke German, they put me in a work group. I had to decide right then whether to let myself hate the soldiers who had done this. It was an easy decision. Why was it an easy decision? Okay, deep breath. You're not ready for this. It was an easy decision, he says, because I was a lawyer. I was a lawyer, right? Not a rabbi, not a monk, not a secret Catholic priest, not any kind of man of the cloth of any tradition, a lawyer. My father was a lawyer. I've known lots of lawyers. The practice of law is not conducive to the growth of saintly virtues. Even if you are a good and honest lawyer, it encourages suspicion and argumentation, generally considered spiritual obstacles, not saintly virtues. How on earth does being a lawyer help you not to hate the people who just machine-gunned your family in the streets? He says, in my practice, this is Buffalo Bill talking, in my practice, I had seen too often what hate could do to people's minds and bodies. Hate had just killed the 6 people who mattered most to me in the world. I decided then that I would spend the rest of my life, whether it was a few days or many years, loving every person I came in contact with. So there is the amazing response that this guy has after this horror that he sees. And so many other people respond with resentment and hatred and anger and all the natural things that we all understand. He makes the decision to love every single person that he comes into contact with for the rest of his life. That's what he does with this. How does he do it? He saw what hatred does to people, and he acted in the moment of trial on that knowledge. Right? He had the discernment to see what hatred does to people. Well, he's a lawyer. Yes, people come and say, I'm angry with this person, go sue him, right? Well, lawyers are frequently hired guns. That's what they do, right? But this guy saw the problem is hatred. And this knowledge he assimilated. He actually made this knowledge work for him in the time of trial. So that when he was put to the test, he chose love. And he did love. He loved them all. He loved the Jews. See, one thing we don't understand is the Jews hated each other, according to the Americans, almost as much as they hated the Germans. Because they came from all different parts of Europe. They didn't speak the same language. They had different traditions, different ideas, and they did not get along. Buffalo Bill was the friend to everyone, all the Jews in the camp, all the German prison guards, and of course, all the American liberators. Every face that he saw, he responded with love. And how can he do that? What stops us from doing that? Right? He lost everything. He had nothing to lose anymore because it was all gone. No job, no career, no friends, no family, all gone. Homeless, penniless, starving in a camp, nothing. Why can't we love? Right? We see the homeless person on the street and we think, well, I'll give him $5, but I can't give him 10. Or I'll buy him lunch, but I can't be too nice to him because he's going to want to come home with me and he stinks and whatever. My house is only so big, I need to provide for my family. Whatever it is, right? We have all these reasons why we can only show so much charity, so much love, right? Because we have our life. We have our agenda. We have our bank account. We have our loved ones. We have something that we need to protect. We hold back. We can't give entirely of ourselves. This man has nothing. Vairagya, renunciation. It has all been ripped from him. And so he is completely, perfectly free to love. All his personal attachments have been removed, and somehow he has managed to accept this. Like I say, we don't know about this guy. Even his name, I don't know, just the story that the medic tells about him, right? But Swami Vivekananda explains it. He says, have the feeling of personal non-attachment with regard to man and see how this mighty feeling of love is working itself out in the world. All his attachments are gone, and he's free to love, right? And his life is gone. He's been taken out of the world, and he has accepted that. Right? You feel the friction of, this is Vivekananda again, you feel the friction of life only when you are in the current of the world. But when you are outside of it, simply as a witness and as a student, you will be able to see that there are millions and millions of channels in which God is manifesting himself as love. We need that detachment to be able to let go of our self-interest, right? That's what was ripped from him. He had no legitimate self-interest anymore because he had nothing to protect, right? And then we see, according to Vivekananda, God manifesting himself as love through all these millions and millions of channels. We are those channels. We are that love, each one of us, that we feel this love and this desire to save the world comes from this love that we feel. We feel it in ourselves and we think, it's got to be better out here. I've got to make this better. Because we feel something better within us, right? And so I think that this is what our concentration camp hero did. He made that resolve. I am going to meet each face from this day forward in my life with love. And each one of these channels that we all are, and that the Jews were, and the American liberators were, and even the German prison guards were, responded to his love. He looked at them and brought love, and love comes back and responds to you. And he saved his world, right? Which clearly includes the lives of all the people he came into contact with, because love is contagious. They felt the love, right? And they all came to him for more of it. Even our medic, our American medic, right? He saw all these people, and there's the love source there, right? And so, if we want to say, he saved his world through love, and if we want to save our world, we have to do it through love. And we have to do that by letting go of our baggage, the stuff, whatever it is in our lives, that prevents us from loving. That is how we save the world, our world. May the good Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. May good betide all. May happiness come to all. May all see the face of truth and be fortified with the armor of love, goodwill, joy, and understanding. Oh, peace, peace, peace.
Lead us from illusion to truth and wisdom's sight. Lead us from the darkness that fears of the night. Lead us from death to endless life, to your heart of love, to your eternal light. Reach us through every veil that seems to hide your face, beyond our every ignorance, beyond both time and space. Give us strength and wisdom through thy blessed grace, and fill
Okay, now before we conclude, I'll have a few announcements here. Okay, it looks like Saturday, we're having Bhagavad Gita class here at 5 p.m. That's Swami Sarvadevananda. And then the day after that, he's going to speak on stages of liberation. And then the Wednesday after that, our sister here, Mataji Krishnaprana, she's going to speak about Swami Subodhananda, one of my favorites, who's kind of, we don't hear a whole lot about him, but he's worth hearing about. Let's see, is there anything else? I mean, coming up, what is it? I think it's the 18th, is Mother's birthday. And I think we celebrate it on the 15th. No, they celebrate it here in Santa Barbara on the 15th. That's a Thursday. And then in Hollywood, we celebrate it on the 18th. So yeah, her birthday is on the 15th, and we celebrate it on the 18th. So, and that's kind of the end of Divine Mother season, I think, after that. Then we do the birthdays, right? Then next year we have Swamiji, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Brahmananda, and Sri Ramakrishna's birthday. But Holy Mother's birthday marks the end of Divine Mother season. We had Durga Puja here, of course, and then Kali Puja in Hollywood, and then there's some little Lakshmi Pujas and Saraswati Pujas in the middle of that. And okay, so I guess that's about it. Thank you all for coming. I'll go to the front and we'll say hi. And then if you want to come back in and talk a little more, we can do that. Okay, thank you.
That stimulated a lot of thought.
Hmm.
It covered a lot of areas of objective and subjective reality and finding our way through this maze of misinformation and being brainwashed. And I'm glad that you covered a lot of that. As far as the planet is concerned, I've personally come to a subjective point where I'm going to believe that science is right and that it's headed towards disaster for all of us on the planet, and that there doesn't seem to be any political will from any nation to even try to reverse it. So there's not much that I could do except for separate the bottles from the fans and things like that, really, or get upset. So I think this is a reality for the planet. I mean, if you look forward a couple hundred years ago, this isn't going to be here, as far as science says. So what would you say we should do besides, what would you say we should do as far as coping with this reality?
Yeah, I was afraid that I was going to get into trouble bringing that one up. Science doesn't say that it's going to get worse for the whole planet. I was a scientist at one point. There are places that stand to improve the quality of life from global warming. That's not my position. My feeling is we need to switch to green energy, okay? My point is that I'm not going to go to a museum and spray a bunch of tomato soup on a painting to advocate that position. And I think that it's important for us as spiritual aspirants to understand that why we're here is not to fight for a particular policy, whatever that policy is, right? The reason we're here as spiritual aspirants is to try and realize God. That is the goal of our lives. That's what we're supposed to do. Now, that doesn't mean we're not allowed to have opinions, right? I mean, of course we have opinions. I like you, I think that we should do our little parts, whatever is given to us, to mitigate global warming and climate change. I do. On the other hand, it's not my raison d'etre, right? It's not the point of my being. The point of my being is something else. The point of my being is finding God and growing along spiritual lines. That's why I'm here. So yes, I will try and support the policies that seem wise to me, whatever they may be, in whatever humble way is offered to me. But the crusade is for God. It's not for a policy. Okay, somebody else? There's one in the front.
Thank you. Could you please give some kind of a template on how to transcend the mind?
I thought about that. Yeah, that's another talk. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I thought, you can only do so much in an hour, because I thought, you should say something about how to do this transcending the mind business, but that's really another talk. Basically the short answer is yoga, right? And Swami Vivekananda has divided yoga into 4 broad categories, right, for the different temperaments that try and grow spiritually. So the active type tries to practice karma yoga, with the yoga of work, right, where you try and work for the good of others, try and work through love, like I talked about with Buffalo Bill. Try and make love the motive power behind your work, as opposed to personal gain or recognition or any of those things. That's karma yoga. Jnana yoga is sort of the philosophical approach, the reasoning approach. What is this life really? What am I really? How did I get here? Is there a God? What does he mean to me? What do I mean to him? What happens after I die? What's the point of all this? These kinds of questions we ask and ask and ask and meditate upon. Who am I? How did I get here? That kind of stuff. Jnana yoga for the philosopher. Bhakti yoga for the lover. You want to sing to God. You want to praise God. You want to worship God and with some kind of ritualistic show of devotion, right? That is the yoga of love, bhakti yoga. And then Raja yoga, meditation. I want to control all the thought waves of the mind. I want to conquer the mind, transcend the mind. And then Raja yoga, as you probably know, is the handbook is written by Patanjali. He has yoga aphorisms, and I can't cover the yoga aphorisms in a few minutes. You can spend a lifetime studying yoga aphorisms. But that's the basic starting point for transcending the mind through meditation, Raja yoga, the yoga aphorisms of Patanjali. And they are given a nice commentary in volume 1 of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. So he goes through he has an introduction to Raja Yoga and some of the techniques, and then he goes through Patanjali's yoga aphorisms one by one and talks about each one of them and then tries to explain. Also, the founder of this place, Swami Prabhavananda, he wrote a book called How to Know God, which is also a commentary on Patanjali's yoga aphorisms. So those things are accessible for, if you're interested in pursuing that. Have you read those things?
I guess I didn't ask my question correctly.
Oh.
I have read, I have tried, I meditate, I listen to everything, but my mind is so strong. It is not willing to sit to the side for that true surrender to come. So I'm looking for like a secret key or a secret
Yeah, I wish
word.
I had one. Yeah, no, I don't have a secret key. But I think, was it here? I can't remember. I think it was here last time I talked. Meditation, as you must know if you've been practicing it regularly, has a lot of fringe benefits that have been increasingly, is that me? No, I think that's somebody else. That have been increasingly documented over the last decade. Meditation is very trendy now, as you probably know. And they've shown how meditation improves quality of life in any way that you can measure it. Your health is better, your attitude is better, your sense of fulfillment and well-being is better. They're all elevated through the practice of meditation. They can actually see through MRI increased cortical folding in the brain with just 20 minutes a day of meditation. They can notice after some amount of time, I don't know how long, probably a few months, they can actually see a change in the cortical folding in your brain, which is associated with information processing, memory retrieval, and also a higher, elevated sense of well-being. They associate increased cortical folding with all those qualities through whatever neuroscience they're practicing. And so it's important to understand that none of those people in those studies knows how to meditate. Not one of those. I guarantee you, if you're meditating 20 minutes a day, you can't meditate. There's no way that in 20 minutes a day of meditation after 6 months that you're doing any kind of thing close to controlling your mind or transcending your mind. You're not doing it. What you're doing is what we all know. If you're lucky, you're trying to concentrate and then you get distracted, and then you try and concentrate again, and then you get distracted, or you're trying to witness the mind, if that's what you do, and then it pulls you with it down the river, and then you go, okay, wait, no, right? You go back to witnessing the mind and for a while, and then it pulls you in some other direction, right? That's meditation that we know, right? That's the meditation that they're practicing that's having all these life benefits, right? So my point is this. Okay, we haven't transcended the mind, right, and seen through the matrix. We're not living in this overwhelming love that I talked about today yet, okay? Nevertheless, the journey there is not without fringe benefits that are well documented and proven. Don't quit. You know, I went to, I think it was Cal State San Bernardino, and one of the students there, she said, you know, I tried meditating for a while, but I just couldn't do it, and so I quit, you know. But that's the point, is that when we do that, when the mind, we try and focus it, and then we lose it, and we bring it back. And we focus it, and we lose it, and we bring it back. It's like going to the gym, right? You drop the weight, you lift it again. You drop the weight, you lift it again. Well, what you're doing is building a muscle. Same thing in the mind, right? This ability to recall focus, right? Bring the mind back, its attention back to the matter at hand. That is a very valuable skill in this world. Not just for seeing through the matrix, but just for surviving here and being happy and healthy. So no, I can't tell you some magic trick to finish the job. If I believe me, I would, if I knew it. But in the meantime, I'd say don't quit, because the fringe benefits are well documented and well worth it. And maybe you've been doing it long enough to know that if you quit, everything gets worse after, you don't even realize it right away. But if you quit, after a few months, you'll realize that your life has become a tangled mess, and you don't know why. And someone will tell you, are you still meditating anymore? And you go, oh, yeah, I guess that somehow dropped off, I've seen that failure mode manifest many times, and I would recommend not experimenting with it, because you don't need to prove that to yourself. Okay. Yeah.
You've learned how to cope. My mother taught us all 10 of us. You're stressed out. I became transcendental meditations when I was 19 in Michigan. And my mother was a preventionist nurse, played piano, sang opera. She was a woman that sewed all of my sister's dresses and some of my brothers and my clothes. I've got 4 brothers and 5 sisters. 3 died of cancer in the last 6 years. And I had my other died of liver cirrhosis straight into the night. So I don't drink anymore. I try to find peace. I try to understand the world. These dictators like Putin have got to go to jail. And that's how I'm going to find peace, is I want our special forces to go in now, not tomorrow. We need public hospitals, we need public schools, and he needs to go. And I'm not going to hate him, but I want him out tomorrow,
Okay.
today, whenever.
Okay.
And I do a podcast, I'm not trying to advertise, but it's to get kids off fentanyl. It's called Years, Months, and Months. Try to save your life if you like those drugs that are on the radio station.
Okay.
KCSP 1298. I'm doing what I can because my nephew died last Sunday. And my brother and sister-in-law are still out over it.
I'm sorry.
It's the worst pandemic of young kids in the 30s, women, men. Other than car crashes, it's fentanyl. They're buying these drugs on the street, they're not testing them, they're going to rage parties, and they're dying. 18 died in this county last month. The hospital tells me the numbers don't cover their names. So anyway, I know you know how to cope. Are you from a large family? Did you grow up Catholic? You talked about a monastery.
Yeah, I'm an only child, and I grew up in Vedanta.
In the what?
This.
Oh, okay. Well, I like community faith. I go to the Jewish, the synagogue. I do a lot of going to churches because I want to understand everybody's viewpoint.
we got,
Love always wins.
yes, love conquers all. Can you, do you have the microphone?
I think they can hear me. I'm pretty.
Okay, she's got a question behind you. Okay, there we go.
Hello? It's in Buffalo Bill's case, kind of what you pointed out, he had lost everything, and usually, you know, us in a family, we have things to protect. And it's not like I can leave the family now, right? But I do try to practice Vedanta. Like,
It's a good question. I think I know where you're going
How-
with this. Yeah.
Vedanta, like what he grew up in, or, yeah, Vedanta. And so, on the surface, I know we have to participate in our family and our households and, you know, take care of everyone. But how do we get that
Right. I understand your question.
equanimity, you know,
Right,
so
yeah.
that,
You know, he had a very exceptional experience, right? I mean, to have everything ripped away from you instantly like that, and then to be able to respond with love. I mean, that is truly remarkable. I mean, how many people actually in that bizarre war, it wasn't that uncommon to have your family taken out in the street and shot. That happened. This man somehow managed to transcend the natural hatred and self-pity and all the rest of the negative emotions that plague so many other people, and instead choose love. Now that is superhuman. The man is superhuman. People like you and I, who have various duties to our family, to our friends, to our employers, to our employees, however that is, what is advocated for, you know, these more or less normal circumstances, as opposed to, you know, World War II Nazi Germany, is the path of duty, right? So you do your duty, and you do it with a kind of sense of detachment. Yes, I live with these people. I owe something to my mom. I have to show her respect. I have to show her love. But who is really my own, and who I'm really doing all this work for, that is the one, the Lord, or however you look upon it, right? That is the spiritual agenda behind the apparent life, right? So you do all your duties in the world, do them the best you can, honestly and patiently, with as much love as you can manifest from day to day. And the teaching is that through duty done well, the soul advances towards this state of transcendence that I was talking about today. Most people don't get it immediately by having your family shot in front of you in the street. That is an exceptional story, right? The rest of us who live not such noteworthy lives, thankfully perhaps, have to proceed gradually, right? So it sounds to me actually like, getting back to your question, we just need to be a little patient. That's one of the things that is emphasized again and again in spiritual life: patience and perseverance. Patience, perseverance, sincerity of purpose. Those are the things that we need. And then really once we have those, it's up to God to take care of the rest. And when and how the universe responds to our efforts, hard to say. When the grace comes, I don't know. But it does come. At least it comes to other people. Why not us? One of these days.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
You know, they're always saying the world's going to end. All these evangelists want your money. It's just a big smoke screen. But I wonder what this world's going to be like in 100 years with all these resources up, and we don't have wind, solar, and other power. Not going to leave much to the grandkids. I've got children, and when the kids are getting born, my daughter's about ready to have one, I am very concerned. And so climate change is real. And these doubters that are saying that there's no climate change and this is fake and that's fake and the election's fake, I just can't take it shut it out, turn it off. I don't listen to Fox News, even though I have a fellow broadcaster, went to University of Kansas, Steve Ducey. He's on New York Fox in the morning. And I told him, Steve, get real, quit faking the news.
Okay.
I saw him in the studio in New York, and I just don't like what they're doing. They take something and stretch it, and they bend it their way. Propaganda, that's evil.
Mm. I didn't hear a question.
Well, what is your view on the world spinning and turning, and our Earth's, who knows if we'll have it another couple hundred years? Let's hope Putin doesn't start the atomic bombs, the nuclear warheads. Let's just hope that he's got sense enough to do that, or he'll ruin Russia and everything else on the Earth. Armageddon. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a possibility. So what's your view on the world as it spans in the future?
I don't have any insight as to where the world is going.
We all have to be good to each other,
Yeah, my feeling, as I tried to communicate today, is that if we can manifest love in our lives and in our hearts, questions such as, what's the world going to be like in 100 years, will not bother us anymore.
Well, be kind. That'll help.
Well, we think we want an answer to the question, right? We think we want an answer to where is the world going to be in 100 years, or who's going to put Putin in jail, or these kinds of questions. It's not It's not really what we want. What we really want is for those questions not to arise. I remember when I moved into the monastery in Trabuco, my advisor at UCLA was a devout atheist, confirmed atheist, ex-Catholic, and just had no use for anything religious.
Tanks will be warm food when we die.
And his wife was also of the same persuasion. And she came to the monastery because she thought I was basically a normal person. And then what happened to you? You were in this lab, you were working with these people, and now you've joined this monastery, and it's some Hindu organization, and you're white, and what's wrong with you, And I thought you were normal, and you're not.
That was their view.
Right. And so I told her that, those kinds of questions like, is there a God? How did I get here? Where am I going? What is this place I live in? Am I really this body? When this body dies, does my consciousness cease? These kinds of questions. All those things I thought were not getting answered in the laboratory where I was working. I thought, you're not really answering the important questions here. You're doing something else. And these questions were bothering me. So I joined the monastery for a while. Did I get the answer to those questions? No, I didn't. Not yet, anyway. But the questions don't bother me anymore. I'm not bothered by them anymore. And what we really want is to not be bothered by these kinds of questions, whatever they are. If it's how did I get here? Is there a God? What's going to happen in the world today? Who's going to kill Putin? All these things. These are basically mental disturbances. We need to calm the mind. We need to calm the mind. And we do that when we calm the mind and we find that these questions don't bother us anymore. What does that mean we have? It means we have peace, some degree of peace. And when we have some degree of peace, where we're not bothered by existential questions, political questions, social questions of drug use and all these other things, and we feel that peace, what happens? Other people also feel that peace that we feel within ourselves. It spreads, just like Buffalo Bill in the camp. When we have that sense of contentment and love, and we carry it with us, other people also respond to it. That is what I tried to pitch today as the way to save the world.
Do you believe there's God in all of us, and if you need help, you seek help through your other friends that have, they got their good advice, and that's how I handled it. I've got cousins in car wreck, and there's cancer, deaths in the family, and drugs with these friends, and only 2 of them survived that night on Narcan. It was too late for him. I just decided, you know what? Well, way back in college, we took Western Eastern civilization, and I learned that you seek God through everybody, and it's like it takes a village. You've got to communicate, and everybody helps out, everybody in need. That's my answer.
Okay.
Do you see God in everybody?
I'm working on it.
Well, I do, because that's the only way I can function.
Well, I think looking, is important. If you can remember, just remembering at the grocery store when you're standing in line.
Be patient.
Sarvam Kalvidam Brahman. All this is verily Brahman. As you're standing in line, you could look at the gossip magazines, you could look at the people and start, sizing them up. Or you can remember, wow, all this is verily Brahman, right? You can try and remember this at various times, That's an effort to see God in everyone. And the more we do that, it's not sudden, it's gradual, right? This is that gradual process. But that is the way, and it does give us little tiny improvements in our state of mind and in our hearts, both. We feel more sympathy and we feel more peace.
Mm-hmm. And you can lead the addicts to water, but you can't make them drink. The facts are 1 in 10 makes it through rehab. The other 9 shoot back up, they're addicted, and they die. And there's nothing I can do about it. You just have to accept it. That's part of life.
We good?
Well,
One more?
thank
Yeah?
you.
Uh-huh.
I felt the peace you spread today. And the wisdom, thank you very much. I see your light. And I'm curious, where are your friends today? The Venice friends and the college friends? 'Cause
died.
They had labels
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Some of them died. The guy that I followed around the boardwalk is dead.
Oh.
Yeah. And some of them, there's some gangsters I knew that got shot.
So no change, nobody changed worlds.
No. Actually, no, I guess that's not true. One of my nerd friends became a multimillionaire and is now living a party life. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that happens to the nerd guys, yeah.
And I think the nerds should have a new name, just thoughtful. No, don't call them nerds, just thoughtful people.
No, they're nerds.
Well,
I
yeah.
was in the athletic club and I was in the nerd club in college.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks for
you very
coming.
much.
All right.
Thanks for staying after.
Yeah,
Okay.
you were very inspirational. I loved your talk.
Thank you. Okay. Namaste.
This is not a group thing, but in my humble sharing this opinion, I've been learning that it all breaks down to just consciousness. There's either good light or there's dark. And it speaks through people. So our mind, what I've been experiencing is that the mind is something that scans and perceives. And in a way, it's captured by one or the other. So either the wind of goodness and openness comes through us, or the wind of fear and doomsday comes through us. That it's really not even us. Something is moving through us.
Well, yeah, these vibrations are in the atmosphere. But by practicing yoga, by trying to regularly calm the mind or to elevate the mind, or whatever your practice is, you become better tuned to different kinds of these influences that are in the atmosphere. And if you allow yourself to dwell on dark thoughts and negative things, you'll find that the mind is more and more attracted to them, and more of them come to you. And the same is true with good, right? You try and keep your mind high and elevated and on higher subjects, and you'll find more and more of those opportunities present themselves to you. So I agree with you. But that doesn't mean that we're helpless. We can influence. It's like a knob on a radio,
Yes.
right?
Yes. No, I don't think we're helpless. We have a choice.
Right.
We constantly have a choice, but we may not know. Like Jesus says, forgive them for they know not what they do. So there's like a not knowingness because we just don't know. But I feel like it is a world of those vibrations that we choose to strive for or to push aside. We dig our own way. We act like water going down the mountain. We're always going to grow and find our way. And if there's an obstacle, obstacle, I choose what I do with the obstacle if I want to continue to grow, or I can be stopped by that obstacle. That's where the choice is, but the energies are all around.
Yeah, I agree. I would say one thing that maybe you left out was grace and praying for help. Because we find obstacles like this in our path, and it doesn't seem like I can just choose to get around this obstacle all the time. Sometimes it seems like the obstacle is too much for me. And so at that point, I have to, this is why, I don't know what your personal approach is, but for those who are devoted to a personal God, you mentioned Jesus, that's the time to pray to Jesus for help, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, these obstacles come in our path. Choosing makes it sound like it's pretty easy to get around them, which sometimes it doesn't seem like it is.
It's
Sometimes,
not easy.
right, sometimes you have to pray and cry
Yeah.
and struggle, and then you find that somehow the obstacle has become manageable. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you all for coming. Namaste.
Yeah.
Okay, Jai Ma.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. I should have said that today. Yeah.